When Rembrandt went to live in Amsterdam, having completed his training in Leiden, he was asked to paint a portrait of the Remonstrant minister Uitenboogaard. He was a very important man who was generally held in high regard, and it was therefore vital for Rembrandt and his budding career that he should accept the commission. In fact, one of the preacher's diaries has been preserved, and in it he says that he only had to sit for the painter for a few hours. You might think, therefore, that Rembrandt painted this splendid face in one go, but no, I don't really think so. Because if you paint wet in wet, because paint doesn't dry that quickly, of course, it's very difficult to get any detail. And if you look, for instance, at those crow's feet under his eyes, it's almost impossible. In any case, whether he spent a long time over this painting or not, the face has been painted with a great deal of psychological insight and sensitivity. We have learned over the years that Rembrandt built up his pictures in several stages. It wasn't until halfway through the 19th century that artists began to paint their pictures all in one go. There's a logical explanation for 17th century artists building up their pictures in several stages. They had to make up their paint themselves, or rather their apprentices did this for them in their studio, and you had to be very economical with paint back then. And so you only made up the amount you needed. So for instance, when you started on the face, you knew what colors you needed and how much paint you needed for the face. There was also the problem that certain pigments only worked with a transparent binding agent, and then you had some that dried more quickly than others, and so on. The palettes were also considerably smaller in those days than they are now. Nowadays you buy a tube of paint, you simply squeeze some out on your palette, and when the tube dries out and hardens, you simply buy another one. But things were quite different back then. This was a time when making up paint and pigments was an interminable task. Rembrandt received most of his commissions for portraits from the art dealer Hendrik van Uylenburg. Rembrandt married his niece Saskia van Uylenburg in 1634. Rembrandt lived in what is now the Rembrandthuis in the Jodenbreestraat here in Amsterdam. It was a magnificent but hugely expensive house, which Rembrandt was paying off in installments, and records dating back to that time show that the production of portraits increased considerably during that time. Rembrandt was a good businessman, and he ran his studio with great business acumen. The apprentices he had working in his studio were obviously taught by him, but they mainly helped in the production of paintings. So it often happened that a pupil would be working on a painting in Rembrandt's style. But that was, after all, why they were there, to learn to paint like Rembrandt. And that picture would then be signed by Rembrandt himself. And then it would pass for a real Rembrandt and be sold on the free market as such.